We are here today to watch the murder trial. This is day one of the murder trial against Robert Tellis, who is accused of having slain the Las Vegas, Nevada reporter Jeff German. I believe his name is pronounced German. We're going to find out here during this trial. Um, I do appreciate you all coming in, watching this with me. Bernard, I can't wait to watch this clown in court, but he is no longer representing himself. He has a defense attorney, and that defense attorney is actually is supposedly a pretty good one. I'm not obviously from Nevada, so I don't know much about this particular defense attorney, but he is, so I've heard, a very good defense attorney. Now, Robert Tellis did at one point uh, say that he was going to be representing himself. He got into a huge back and forth with the judge about representing himself, and there was a whole hearing on it. And the judge was trying to convince him not to represent himself. He eventually took the judge's advice and sought counsel. He went through several defense attorneys. At least one of them was a public defender before settling on his current defense attorney, who is going to be doing this particular trial. This is the day of opening statements, but on Monday there was a hearing in the case, and during that hearing there were actually two defense attorneys there with Mr. Tellis. So I believe there's going to be a first and a second chair, and the second chair likely won't have much interaction. He's probably there for assistance. He may question some witnesses. That's typically how it goes. In order to get essentially credit for having participated in the trial, he has to do something during the trial, like question a witness or argue a particular motion that may occur during the trial itself. So he will do something, but his role is probably going to be limited. He's probably just there for help. But the main attorney, the first chair, is the defense attorney that was hired by Mr. Tellis. I'm glad to see Miss Carol is here today, and Fred, good to see you joined us. So for those of you who don't know what's going on here, Robert Tellis is a former public administrator. Jeff, good to see you here as well, and Akeem. Jeff is a former public administrator for Clark County. That's an elected position, and he was alleged engaging in some employment problems with the staff at the public administrator's office. There are allegations of sexual discrimination, racial discrimination, age discrimination, and generally creating a hostile work environment for four individuals at the public administrator's office. And they all either filed complaints with the HR department, or they signed on as witnesses of the things that other people filed complaints with their HR office about. And the HR department did nothing. So they eventually reached out to Jeff German about what was going on. And Jeff German began investigating. He wrote 4 articles, I believe, in the newspaper for which he worked. I'm forgetting the name of the newspaper presently, but he wrote several articles about this alleged hostile work environment. And Mr. Tellis began kind of a social media fight with Mr. German. A few months later, someone dressed in essentially a construction worker's attire, with a large straw hat, a construction worker's orange top, and a pair of gray Nikes, carrying a duffel bag, was seen going to Mr. Gurman's home and kind of hiding out. Now, this is on, I believe, like Ring doorbell camera footage from a neighbor's house, kind of hiding out and lying in wait for Mr. Gurman. Mr. Gurman then appears exiting the home, and whoever is lying in wait, there's a scuffle between the two. It's kind of hidden in the video footage behind some foliage. So you don't see exactly what's going on. But neighbors later found Mr. Gurman there, and he was either at that point near death or he was deceased at that point. Now, the assailant left the initial scene and kind of walked away, and then apparently he came back to check on the body and make sure that this individual was deceased, apparently in an effort to make sure that he could not be identified by the victim. All of this, of course, was caught on Ring doorbell footage. And an investigation, of course, into the slaying occurred. And a large part of the investigation was conducted by the reporters that worked with Mr. Gurman at the newspaper. So they put together a few pieces. One of them was that Mr. Tellis walks with a strange gait. I don't want to call it a limp, but it's not a normal gait. It's not a normal walk. And they had video footage of him having walked previously. And then they had the video footage, obviously, from the scene of the crime where this person garbed in this construction worker attire appears to walk the same way as Mr. Tellis in the prior video. So that led them to believe perhaps Mr. Tellis did this. The police then released a photograph of the assailant's vehicle, which was a Tahoe, a burgundy Tahoe. And people with the newspaper found that a similar vehicle, a burgundy Tahoe, parked in the driveway of Mr. Tellis. It is registered to his wife. And of course, Mr. Tellis has access to this burgundy Tahoe. And when they told the police about that, that coupled with the gate apparently was enough for the police to at least arrest Mr. Tellis. And upon arresting him, they conducted a search of his home and his garage. They also took him in and took DNA from him. When they searched his home and his garage, they found a cut up large straw hat like the one that the assailant was wearing. It was cut up as if someone had tried to destroy it for some reason. They also found a pair of gray Nikes. And those gray Nikes were also, one of them was also cut up as if someone was in the process of destroying that. They also have apparently a baggie of teeny tiny pieces of this cut up shoe. So it's not just that somebody, took some scissors to it and cut the shoe up. They took some time. It looks like the shoe looks like it was placed in an industrial shredder, and very small pieces were made of this shoe. Now, once they released him back to the home and they were able to then, process the DNA evidence, they realized that Mr. Gurman had DNA under his fingernails at the time of his departure from this world that matched the DNA of Mr. Tellis that they took from him when he was in custody. So I say all that to say this. There's some circumstantial evidence linking Mr. Tellis to this particular crime. There's also apparently DNA evidence that's linking Mr. Tellis to this particular crime. And while I'm not going to say whether or not Mr. Tellis committed this crime, because none of us actually know, uh, it's going to be interesting to watch his defense attorney try to get out from under this particular evidence. I'm going to try to show you some of what I've been talking about here. So first, let me try to pull up this image. I am monitoring the court at this particular moment. So right now, this is what's going on in the courthouse. Obviously, nothing has started yet, so we are still awaiting the judge, either the judge to take the bench, or we might be waiting for them to deal with some preliminary issues before we get to the actual heart of the opening statements. Typically, there's going to be some last minute motion practice after the jury has been impaneled and things of that nature. They may be doing some of that now. It may just be that there's a juror who has not yet shown up. Uh, we could be being delayed here for any number of reasons. But we will continue monitoring what's going on in the court, even while we're talking about other things. So let me now share this image. So this is an image of that's Mr. Tellis in the bottom right, and on the left hand side you see the assailant in the construction worker garb. And if you notice the shoes, those shoes are a grayish color. They are Nikes. There is an image that shows the Nike logo, an image of the assailant. That duffel bag that he's carrying is actually a gray color. I know it looks a little black here, but it's actually a gray color. And notice the straw hat that the assailant is wearing. That is similar to the cut up hat that was supposedly found in Mr. Tellis's home when the police searched the home. Now, the police obviously also have photographs of the assailant's vehicle. Oh, it looks like we're starting, so we will pick up here with the court, and if anything needs to be explained further, I will do so. There's no volume yet. I do have the volume on. This is from Law and Crime, where we are getting this from. Uh, if possible, I'm going to switch over to Court TV. They've not yet started their live feed, but they tend to do fewer copyright strikes. So we're going to try to switch over to that as soon as that becomes available. My last video actually got a copyright strike. I used a few portions of the of a Dateline uh, news clip, and YouTube said, "No, you can't do that." I must not understand what fair use is. I mean, I'm just an attorney, so you know. Yeah, I don't have any volume, so you're not hearing what's going on because of uh, an issue with the stream. I don't hear the what's going on either. I don't think that they've turned on the microphones yet. They're in the courthouse. That is Mr. Tellis there. He appears to be sitting next to Mr. I believe his name is Draskovich, the attorney, the lead attorney on the case. I can't make him out clearly. I believe that's Mr. Draskovich, but it may be the other attorney, the second seat. Yes, this is Judge Levitt presiding. Yes, she is very experienced. And she did go out of her way to explain to Mr. Tellis what the implications of him representing himself, especially considering that he was behind bars when he was trying to represent himself and would not have access to any of the Westlaw, any of the legal search functions that an attorney who was not behind bars would have. But he is, or he was, an attorney. I believe his bar license has been at least suspended at this point. And yes, he is being held as far as I know. Still don't have any sound. All right, we're going to the other stream because they seem to have sound. There we go. How's the volume for everyone?
Instructions on the law, which I will give you at the close of the case and before you retire to consider your verdict. This is a criminal case commenced by the state of Nevada, which I may sometimes refer to as the state, against the defendant, Mr. Tellis. The case is based on an indictment. The clerk will now read the indictment to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and state the plea of the defendant to that indictment.
District Court, Clark County, Nevada, the state of Nevada, plaintiff versus Robert Tellis, defendant. Case number C-368935, Department number 12, indictment. State of Nevada, County of Clark, the defendant above named, Robert Tellis, accused by the Clark County Grand Jury of the crime of murder with use of a deadly weapon, victim 60 years of age or older, felony, committed at and within the County of Clark, state of Nevada, on or about the 2nd day of September 2022 as follows. did willfully and lawfully with malice aforethought kill Jeffrey Gehrman, who is 60 years of age or older, with use of a deadly weapon, to wit, a knife, by stabbing the said Jeffrey Gehrman multiple times about the body, the said killing having been 1, willful, deliberate, and premeditated, and or 2, perpetrated by lying in wait for the said Jeffrey Gehrman, and or 3, perpetrated by abuse of an older person, dated this 19th day of October 2022, Stephen B. Wilson, Clark County District Attorney, signed by Pamela Weckerly, Chief Deputy District Attorney, to which the defendant has pled not guilty.
Thank you. This case is based on the indictment which has just been read to you by the clerk of the court. You should distinctly understand that the indictment is simply a charge and that it is not in any sense evidence of the allegations it contains. The defendant has entered a plea of not guilty to the indictment. The state therefore has a burden of proving each of the elements as alleged in their charging document by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. As the defendant sits here today, he is presumed innocent. The purpose of this trial is to determine whether the state of Nevada will meet their burden of proof. It is your primary responsibility as jurors to find and determine the facts. Under our system of criminal procedure, you are the sole judge of the facts. You are to determine the facts from the testimony you hear and the other evidence, including exhibits introduced in court. It is up to you to determine the inferences which you feel may be properly drawn from the evidence. The parties may sometimes present objections to some of the testimony or other evidence. It is the duty of a lawyer to object to evidence which he or she believes may not properly be offered, and you should not be prejudiced in any way against a lawyer, who makes objections on behalf of the party he or she represents. At times I may sustain objections or direct that you disregard certain testimony or exhibits. You must not consider any evidence to which an objection has been sustained or which I have instructed you to disregard. Anything you may have seen or heard outside the courtroom is not evidence and must also be disregarded. Remember, statements, arguments, and opinions of counsel are not evidence in the case. However, if the attorneys stipulate as to the existence of a fact, you must accept the stipulation as evidence and regard that fact as proved. You must not speculate to be true any insinuation suggested by a question asked a witness. A question is not evidence and may be considered only as it supplies meaning to the answer. You must not be influenced in any degree by any personal feeling of sympathy for or prejudice against the state or the defendant. Both sides are entitled to the same fair and impartial consideration. In considering the weight and value of the testimony of any witness, you may take into consideration the appearance, attitude, and behavior of the witness, the interests of the witness in the outcome of the case, if any, the relation of the witness to the defendant or to the state, the inclination of the witness to speak truthfully or not, and the probability or improbability of the witness's statements, and all of the facts and circumstances in evidence. Thus you may give the testimony of any witness just such weight and value as you believe the testimony of the witness is entitled to receive. There are two kinds of evidence, direct and circumstantial. Direct evidence is testimony by a witness about what that witness personally saw or heard or did. Circumstantial evidence is testimony or exhibits which are proof of a particular fact from which, if proven, you may infer the existence of a second fact. You may consider both direct and circumstantial evidence in deciding this case. The law permits you to give equal weight to both, but it is for you to decide how much weight to give to any evidence. Opening statements and closing arguments of the attorneys are intended to help you in understanding the evidence and applying the law, but they are not evidence. No statement, ruling, remark, or comment which I make during the course of this trial is intended to indicate my opinion as to how you should decide the case or to influence you in any way in your determination of the facts. At times, I may even ask questions of witnesses. If I do so, it is for the purpose of bringing out matters which I feel should be brought out and not in any way to indicate my opinion about the facts or to indicate the weight I feel you should give to the testimony of the witness. I may also find it necessary to admonish the attorneys, and if I do, you should not show prejudice against a lawyer or his or her client because I have found it necessary to admonish him or her. Until the case is submitted to you, you must not discuss it with anyone, even with your fellow jurors. After it is submitted to you, you must discuss it only in the jury room with your fellow jurors. It is important that you keep an open mind and not decide any issue in the case until the entire case has been submitted to you under instructions from the court. The trial will proceed in the following manner. The Deputy District Attorney will make an opening statement, which is an outline to help you understand what the state expects to prove. Next, the defendant's attorney may, but is not required to make an opening statement. Opening statement serves an introduction to the evidence which the party making the statement intends to prove. The state will then present its evidence, and counsel for the defendant may cross-examine the witnesses. Following the state's case, the defendant may present evidence, and the deputy district attorney may cross-examine the witnesses. However, as I have said, the defendant is not obligated to present any evidence. After all of the evidence has been presented, I will instruct you on the law. After the instructions on the law have been read to you, each side will have the opportunity to present oral argument. What is said in closing argument is not evidence. The arguments are designed to summarize and interpret the evidence. Since the state has a burden of proving the defendant guilty by proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the state has the right to open and close the arguments. After the arguments have been completed, you will then retire to deliberate upon your verdict. Again, let me remind you that until the case is submitted to you, do not talk to each other about anyone who has anything to do with it until the end of the case when you go to the jury room to decide upon your verdict. Do not talk with anyone else about this case or about anyone who has anything to do with it until the trial has ended and you have been discharged as jurors. Anyone else includes members of your family and your friends. You may tell them that you are a juror in a criminal case, but don't tell them anything else about it until after you've been discharged by the court. Do not let anyone talk to you about the case or about anyone who has anything to do with it. If someone should try to talk to you, please report that to me immediately by contacting the court martial. Do not read any news stories or articles or listen to any radio or television reports about the case or about anyone who has anything to do with it. As jurors, you will be given the opportunity to ask written questions of the witnesses called to testify in this case. You are not encouraged to ask large numbers of questions because that is the primary responsibility of counsel. Questions may be asked, but only in the following manner. After both lawyers have finished questioning the witness, and only at this time, if there are additional questions you would like to ask the witness, you may then seek permission to ask that witness a written question. Should you desire to ask a question, write your question down with your juror number on a full sheet of clean paper and raise your hand. All questions from jurors must be factual in nature and designed to clarify information already presented. In addition, jurors must not place undue weight on the responses to their questions. The court martial will pick up your question and present it to the court. All questions must be directed to the witness and not to the lawyers or to the court. After consulting with counsel, I will then determine if your question is legally proper. If I determine that your question may properly be asked, I will ask the question. No adverse inference should be drawn if the court does not allow a particular question. I do follow that procedure pretty strictly, so you'll know when it's your opportunity to ask written questions. When the witness is done being questioned by both sides, I'm going to turn to the witness. I'm going to thank them for being here, and I'm going to excuse
These aren't
them from
instructions
their
at this
subpoena.
point.
If you
She's
want
just
me
kind
to
of having a
ask
dialogue with the
question,
jury.
please get my attention. I will have the witness stay here until you have an opportunity to write your question down and present it to the court. What I don't do is after I do excuse a witness from their subpoena, I will not require them to come back to the courthouse to answer a written question by a juror. So just please get my attention before I do excuse that juror if you do have a written question. Also, when you came in, there were notebooks on your chairs. Those are your notebooks. They must remain in the courtroom at all times until you go back to deliberate upon your verdict. In the front, there's a pocket that you can open up. There's a sheet of paper, and that just gives you information about where you are and phone numbers in case you have any type of emergency when we're out of session. You can take that piece of paper with you when you leave. Everything else must stay in the courtroom at all times. The instructions I have given you are in there. The admonishment that I'm required to give you every time we take a recess is in there as well. And if you need to refer to the procedure to ask written questions, that is in there as well. Also, at the very end, there should be some paper there for you to take notes. You're not required to take notes, but you may take notes. When you go back to deliberate upon your verdict, you will not have a transcript. So it will be your memories collectively, and any notes that you have taken, you'll be able to share those and refer to those during your deliberations. At the end of the day, the court martial is under court order to collect those notebooks. He puts them in a safe place. I assure you, I will not let anyone have access to those notebooks. They will be kept strictly confidential. Your notes will be kept confidential. And when you come in the next morning, your notebooks will be on your chairs waiting for you. At this time, the state of Nevada may address the jury panel in their opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning. All day long on
So I'm just going to pause it right there. What we're going to be listening for in both the prosecution and the defense's opening statement is essentially their theory of the case. So in the beginning of the trial, they're going to kind of lay out what they think the evidence is going to show. And it's going to be very interesting to hear Mr. Draskovich's theory of the case and how he's going to weave in this supposed theory that the police are setting Mr. Tellis up, because I believe that's his theory of the case. The prosecution is probably just going to be going with, here's the evidence. It's clear, it's convincing. Go ahead and convict him.
September the 2nd of 2022, Roy and Holly Bailey were concerned about their neighbor across the street. He was a man by the name of Jeffrey Gehrman. The Baileys and Gehrman had been neighbors for over 20 years, so they had come to know each other's habits. And on the 2nd of September of 2022, the Baileys noticed that Mr. Gehrman's garage door was open and his car was parked in his garage, and that was unusual. They called him, they texted him all day on the 2nd of September, and they didn't get a response. Finally, on the evening of the 2nd, Mr. Bailey went over and just shut the garage for Jeff just to protect his house. But at that time, they still hadn't received any response from their calls or texts. On September the 3rd, still having no response, Roy Bailey walked over to Jeff Gehrman's house and was trying to check on him. He found his neighbor, Jeff Gehrman, on the side of his house. Mr. Gehrman was over 60 years old at the time, and so initially it was thought that maybe he had had a medical episode. Soon after, though, it was discovered that he had been murdered. Mr. Gehrman had sharp force injuries to multiple parts of his body, all over. He also, when they found him on September the 3rd, had signs of decomposition, indicating that he had not been killed on the 3rd, but was killed earlier. Investigators assessed the crime scene and took note of several things. One of the things they took note of was that Mr. Gehrman's phone was in his pocket. His car keys were in his pocket as well. His wallet with money was on his person as well, suggesting to investigators that robbery was not a motive in this case. Investigators looked around the surrounding area of where Mr. Gehrman was found, and they noticed damage to the bushes in the area of where the body was. They looked closer and actually saw blood on some of the bushes in the area by Mr. Gehrman's body. And they noticed it on some of the outdoor decorations as well, and they took note of that in their investigation. There appeared to be blood on some of those items. Detectives and crime scene analysts looked inside Mr. Gehrman's house as well. Inside the house, there was no sign of forced entry. There was no sign of struggle. All of his valuables were present inside the house. Oops, let me back up just a little bit. Mr. Kurt's indulgence.
Sure.
She is under a time limit here, so being prepared is always a good thing when you're giving your opening statement.
You're under, maybe we can approach for one
Yeah,
second.
of course.
The court has muted it. So far what we're hearing is, look, there's signs of a struggle outside. They're probably going to link those signs of struggle to the DNA evidence that was allegedly found under Mr. Gehrman's fingernails. And there's obviously no robbery that went on, because not only was the home not broken into, there was nothing missing from the home. Mr. Gurman still had his wallet and his valuables on him when the police arrived. So this wasn't a crime committed in order to steal something, in order to get at something. They were trying to get at Mr. Gurman. The idea here is to paint an image of who we think the killer is in the minds of the jury, so that they can see that killer come out in Mr. Tellis during the trial. As long as the jury retains a consistent image of who that killer is and can tie that image to Mr. Tellis, the prosecution is winning. I don't know what we're doing here, and I don't know if the prosecutor is still being timed, if she's still under a time limit, or if they've kind of paused her time. They're based on this screen at the podium. It looks like there's a equipment malfunction, so they've probably paused her time, and they're going to the judge is going to tack on time so that she isn't given so that the defense isn't given an unfair advantage. Typically, the defense is going to go on longer than the opening statement from the prosecution, and that's only because the prosecution will likely reserve some of their time to essentially counter whatever the defense said. So let's say each side is given 20 minutes. The prosecution may say, "Judge, please stop me at 15 minutes, and I'll reserve the additional 5 minutes for a response." And then the defense attorney will go for their full 20, and then the prosecution will get back up for the 5 minutes as a rebuttal. The prosecutor should know how all this stuff works, all this equipment works, because the prosecutor is in the courtroom far more often than any other attorneys. And they likely use this equipment on a regular basis. So the fact that the prosecutor can't figure it out is indicative of there being either this is new equipment, or there is actually something wrong with the equipment. I'm wondering now if this is Mr. Tellis's wife behind him in the red. I don't know. Let me pull up a picture of his wife. Maybe you all can tell me what you think. What do you think? Is that the woman in the red behind Mr. Tellis? I can't tell. The woman in this picture seems a little more tanned than the woman behind him, but this may have just been on a different day when she did have a tan. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. As I was saying, detectives and investigators checked the inside of Mr. Gehrman's house. There was no sign of forced entry. All his valuables were present, and there was no indication that anything had been disturbed anywhere in his house. So the scene ends up being kind of that side area of his house, those bushes, and where his body was. And as I discussed before, his car was present in his garage as well. Investigators did find some clues as to a timeline of the last hours of Mr. Gehrman's life. They looked through his trash and they found a receipt that was dated on September the 2nd, and it was a receipt for Roberto's Taco Shop, and the transaction time was 9:03 a.m. So detectives go and pull the video from Roberto's Taco Shop to see if they can find Jeff Gehrman present, and he's alive and well at that time. The video time at Roberto's was incorrect, so they went by the cash register receipt, the transaction time, which was 9:03 a.m. On the 2nd, and they watched, and he bought his food and went back to the car, and it was uneventful. One thing that was lucky for detectives was that the Baileys, the couple that lived across the street from Mr. Gehrman, had a home surveillance system. And one of their cameras actually pointed to the front of Jeff Gehrman's house. So they pull that video and they see a figure come to the side of Mr. Gehrman's house.
I'm sorry. None of this is considered evidence at this point because it hasn't been properly introduced. What's probably occurred here is that uh, the counsel for the parties have stipulated that these things are going to come into evidence, and so she's allowed to show them to the jury now during her opening statements because they're going to come into evidence later. But unless she properly introduces them, the jury cannot consider this when they are deliberating.
And the figure, as you saw, is dressed in orange. And that person stays lying in wait for Jeff Gehrman. Mr. Gehrman opens his garage and goes over to that side yard, and he's attacked.
So that looks like the assailant is still standing and walking in the back, in the center back of the video that's playing now.
after killing Jeff Gehrman, the assailant walks down from the side yard and goes back down Jeff Gehrman's street and just walks away.
Broad daylight this
Picked up
happened.
on additional surveillance video a little bit further down the street. And eventually, there's surveillance of this individual seen getting into a maroon Yukon Denali SUV. And so police try to collect all available video that is present in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Jeff Gehrman's body was transported.
There will be
for
some graphic
autopsy at the
images
Clark County Medical
displayed at
Examiner's
trial,
office.
so if you don't
His
want to
body
see the
was at
graphic
office.
images,
The cause of death
please
was determined to be
stop
multiple
watching.
sharp force injuries. A crime scene analyst attended the autopsy and collected fingernail clippings and scrapings from Jeff Gehrman's hands to see if there was foreign DNA present. Those samples were taken to Metro's DNA lab, and foreign DNA was detected in the right fingernail clippings of Jeff Gehrman. There was foreign DNA collected, but no one knew who it belonged to. So the murder happens on September the 2nd. Mr. Gehrman's body is found on September the 3rd. After that, Metro released through their public information officer images of that assailant and of the vehicle.
so this is the clearest video that I believe the police have of the assailant. And this is, I believe, where they got the images of the Nike logo on the shoes from.
So after Metro released those images to the public, asking for help if anybody recognized the vehicle or anyone recognized the individuals, they get a lot of calls come in. And some of the calls they get are about an individual by the name of Robert Tellis, the defendant. At the time, Mr. Tellis was the elected public administrator for Clark County, and a public administrator, when someone dies, sometimes handles the property and looking for next of kin in order to apportion property after someone's death. And in 2022, Mr. Tellis was running for re-election for his post as the Clark County administrator. And detectives learned that Jeff Gehrman had written a series of unflattering articles about Robert Tellis. In those news stories, Gehrman alleged that Mr. Tellis had engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a coworker. He alleged that he was a bad manager and that he engaged in favoritism and bullying in the workplace. That was the first article. Mr. Gehrman wrote a second article saying that another individual had to be appointed to the public administrator's office in order to take over the management, alleging that Mr. Tellis was a poor manager. Soon after those articles ran in June, Mr. Tellis lost his primary election for public administrator, and Mr. Gehrman wrote about that as well. Mr. Tellis responded to the articles written by Mr. Gehrman and claimed they were politically motivated, that they were unfair, and he generally disputed what was alleged in those articles. And following this post by Robert Tellis, Jeff Gehrman wrote another article about Robert Tellis, alleging many of the things that I had previously discussed. Mr. Tellis also engaged in saying unfavorable things about Mr. Gehrman on Twitter. He accused Mr. Gehrman of going through his trash. He accused Mr. Gehrman of being a bully. He accused Mr. Gehrman of threatening him, all over Twitter, which I guess is now X. Meanwhile, the police do more investigation, and they learn that the Tellis family has a maroon Yukon Denali SUV. And that is important, obviously, because that is seen in the video connected to the assailant. So the search for video, where it sort of started in Garriman's neighborhood, now focuses.
I likely would have objected at that point. She said the Tellis family has a maroon SUV, and that was seen at the crime scene. There's nothing at this point demonstrating that this maroon SUV was actually at the crime scene. All we know is that they have a maroon SUV and that there was a maroon SUV at the crime scene.
Kind of on the areas in between Tellis's neighborhood and Garriman's neighborhood. And this is not just like, hey, is there any video out there? They really, really look for video. They have a grid, they assign officers, and everybody is looking for any video of this SUV between the two residences. Now, the police still had their timeline where they could go back, and they knew that Jeff Garriman was alive and well at 9:03 a.m. on the 2nd. And they map out the route between Robert Tellis's house and Jeff Garriman's house. Now, Mr. Tellis lives on a street called Spanish Steps, and to get out of his neighborhood, you go down a street called Silk Tassel, and then you can turn on a street called Red Hills Road. And on the morning of the murder of September the 2nd, officers found video of Mr. Tellis's SUV leaving his neighborhood on the morning of the murder. To give you some reference point, Mr. Garriman's residence, as I said, is on Bronze Circle. Streets in his area include Wintergreen Drive and Rock Springs Drive, and detectives go all over that area to see if there's any video that they can find of that Yukon in the neighborhood. And they find on the morning of the murder that that Yukon was present on Rock Springs Drive, and they collect that video. Again, the cross street for Bronze Circle, Mr. Garriman Street, is Wintergreen Drive. They collect video from Wintergreen Drive as well, and they see the red SUV or maroon SUV in the area as well. They see that maroon SUV interact with kind of workers at a construction site. And the SUV does not go in a direct linear line anywhere. It's picked up on cameras at different times in the area of Jeff Garriman's neighborhood. One of the cameras picks up the driver of the SUV. You can kind of see that orange clothing, and it appears that the driver is the only one present. At some point, the cameras in that neighborhood pick up this individual getting out of the car. And the individual is seen on Wintergreen, walking past Bronze Circle, going south on Wintergreen, going north, kind of meandering around the neighborhood near Jeff Garriman's house. Ultimately, the individual is seen traveling in the direction of Jeff Garriman's house on Bronze Circle, going further towards Garriman's house on Bronze Circle, and then ultimately to the side of the house. And then in sequence, after the assailant goes to the side of the house, that's when Mr. Garriman opens his garage door. He goes to the side and he's attacked.
She's replaying the same footage. Again, she has a time limit here, so I don't know why she's replaying footage that everyone has already seen.
And proceeds south on Wintergreen, and it actually heads back in the direction of Garriman's house. And you can kind of see it parked in front. The individual gets out, goes back towards where the body is. And then the individual returns back to the Yukon. The Yukon leaves Bronze Circle, the cul-de-sac for Jeff Garriman. It goes back on Wintergreen Drive. It goes west on Washington. It goes on Rampart. Goes on Apple. And it goes back to Silk Tassel and Mr. Tellis's neighborhood. So with this video evidence and the evidence of the conflict between Mr. Garriman and Mr. Tellis, the police seek a search warrant on September the 7th, and they want to get a DNA sample from Mr. Tellis. They want to seize his phone, and they also want to search his house. On September 7th, the police make contact with Mr. Tellis, and they photograph him all over. In particular, they photograph his hands, and they notice on one of his fingers, he has a Band-Aid. They ask him to remove that Band-Aid, and he has a cut injury on one of his fingers. While detectives are photographing and getting that DNA sample from Mr. Tellis, other detectives go to Mr. Tellis's house and execute a search warrant there. So they go to the house that very same day on September the 7th, and some of the detectives are looking through the living room area of the house, and they're kind of focused on the end of the couch, sort of underneath. They see a shoe, and there's actually a Ziploc bag on the right side of the photo. They examine the shoe. They find the companion shoe, but that shoe has been cut in half and sort of destroyed. And the bag, that baggie that was underneath that couch, actually contains pieces of the shoe as well. So they collect.
So I just got a general question. If you are done with a pair of shoes, why do you cut it up? I've never encountered someone who is done with a pair of shoes and they cut it into little small pieces before throwing it away, before discarding the shoe. Most people discard their shoes in their entirety. So just the fact that he has a pair of destroyed shoes that resemble the ones in the worn by the assailant is pretty damning circumstantial evidence, if you ask me. What do you guys think?
That evidence. And the reason why that was important for them is they compared it to the shoes worn by that assailant on Bronze Circle on September the 2nd. They don't just search in the house, they search in the garage as well, and there's a gray kind of tub in the garage that sort of stores stuff. And they take a closer look and they look at that bag there, and they photograph it and impound it, and they believe the bag is significant in their search because the assailant was carrying a bag that's exactly like the one they found in Mr. Tellis's house. So they find the shoes, they find the bag. They do a search in this garage, which is quite crowded with stuff. And on this, at the bottom of this red tool cabinet, they find a bag from, like a grocery bag from Sprouts. And inside that bag, they find a hat that has been cut up as well. And the hat, of course, is significant because it has the same identifying characteristics as the hat worn by the assailant. So this is all happening on September the 7th. Detectives return Mr. Tellis back to his house on September the 7th, and they actually rush to process his DNA sample that same day. And it's determined that that foreign DNA that was found in those fingernail clippings taken from autopsy of Jeff Garriman, that foreign DNA is consistent with Robert Tellis. So they go.
Is consistent with does not necessarily mean that it is a match. So bear that in mind as we hear the evidence throughout the case.
Back to his residence with the intent of taking him into custody for the murder of Jeff Garriman. And they come to find eventually that he has inflicted injuries on himself, a suicide attempt, and they have to transport him to the hospital for treatment, but he is taken into custody. After that occurs, remember how I said that they took his phone as well? They're able to see some of the messages that occurred between Jeff Garriman and Robert Tellis. One of those messages is from Mr. Garriman on May the 10th. You can see it at the bottom of 2022, where Mr. Garriman says, "Hi, this is Jeff Garriman from the Review Journal. I'm putting together a story on your office. I've talked to several employees who have said you have created a hostile work environment. They also say you've had an inappropriate relationship with one of your staffers, and I very much wanted to talk to you and sort of get your side of the story." After that message was sent, Robert Tellis actually does agree to be interviewed by Jeff Garriman, and he invites him to the public administrator's office, and he sits down with him for an interview. And this is the story that ran digitally for the Review Journal.
The Clark County Public Administrator's Office has been mired in turmoil and internal dissension for 2 years, with workers claiming emotional stress, bullying, and favoritism. Robert Tellis, who leads the office, has also faced allegations of an inappropriate relationship with a coworker, Roberta Lee Kennett. In an interview with Review Journal investigative reporter Jeff Garriman, Tellis.
Notice the way that he's walking in this video. This is the video that they pulled to see the gait and compare it to the gait of the assailant.
Disputed several complaints.
What is your reaction to the allegations from these employees that you have created a hostile environment in this office?
Yeah, I earlier introduced you to to the other 7 team members. And they're folks who all come with a great attitude, and they work hard. And together, them and I, we are what is making the difference with the performance of this office. I've done my best to try to make everyone happy, but again, it's got to be within a certain framework. People just cannot get to do whatever they want, you know. And it's unfortunate that, you know, we've got some people who were here from before who are basically trying to railroad me. And again, you meet those other folks, you know, they're happy, they're dedicated, and we're just here to do a good job.
Tellis, who's up for re-election in the June primary, blames a handful of old-timers for claims about a hostile environment in the office.
And again, no matter what type of gestures I try to make to smooth things over, to make sure that they're happy, you know, they just don't, you know, it's nonstop. And again, like I said, it's hard for me to make sure that I am a cheerleader for the folks who are doing really good work when I've got these other folks who are constantly, you know, surveilling me, constantly trying to sabotage the office. But, you know, we're doing it, but it's hard.
Tellis denied allegations of any improper relationship with Lee Kennett.
And when you hear people raising these allegations about you and quote, you know, personal relationship that you had, what do you say to people about that?
Well, honestly, it's not true. I said I'm, you know, all of my friends, all my family know how much I love my wife. And if you look at, you know, obviously you can't talk to people that do it on a daily basis. You know, but from my social media, from everything, you can see that I am about nothing but justice, fairness, and just being a good person. And it sickens me, it destroys me that somebody would even level like accusations like that, because I don't know, it's unreal. It's unreal the lengths that they're going to. They don't have any qualms trying to ruin my personal life to win this race.
The digital version also included a link with some video of Mr. Tellis and the alleged, the person he was allegedly having an inappropriate relationship with. So after this story ran, Mr. Tellis contacts Jeff Gehrman, and he's upset. He tells Mr. Gehrman, "I don't know what to say. I told you about how much this has all impacted me. You heard from employees who are being harassed by these people, provided you," I think he means proof here, "proof that I was doing my best to actually smooth things over after I had to make hard decisions. Still, you wrote an article that makes me sound like I'm the guilty one. That was not fair and balanced." So what happens after that? Mr. Gehrman contacts Robert Tellis again, and this time the communication is about the county deciding to appoint another person within the public administrator's office to help run things. Mr. Gehrman messages Mr. Tellis, "I understand that Mike Murphy has been brought in by the county, hired by a county as a consultant to work in the office with you guys for a while, and I wanted to see if you had any kind of comment about that." Mr. Tellis messages back to Mr. Gehrman, "I will be providing it to you this evening." Later on,
She's trying to establish motive at this point. So as you're listening to this, try to see if this was a motive that a person could have for committing essentially murder.
Mr. Tellis posts that statement that I had shown you earlier where he says it's politically motivated, none of the allegations are true, this is unfair, I'm being unfairly attacked. All of the things alleged in those articles are false. And what happens after that? Well, Mr. Gehrman writes the story about the consultant being appointed at the public administrator's office. After those two stories run, Mr. Gehrman contacts Tellis again. He says, "I'm putting together another story on your office. This is now in June the 16th. This has to do with the letter you posted on your campaign website addressing the hostile work allegations. Employees view this as a threat of retaliation and have reported it to Human Resources. I'd like to get your comments. And Mr. Tellis responds back, it's fine, at this point they've won, do what you'd like. And of course, after that, Mr. Tellis loses his primary election, so he will no longer be one way or another in, as of 2023, the public administrator. Another thing that detectives found in Mr. Tellis's phone is something associated with like a phone extraction. So when you have a cell phone, it can be downloaded by this program called Celebrite, and it'll download a lot of the data in your phone. And one of the things that was downloaded from Mr. Tellis's phone is files that he accessed on Google Maps. And you can see there are thumbnail photos associated with those maps that he downloaded. And it's probably hard to see because they're little, the thumbnails of what that picture, those two pictures are of. But here's a bigger version, and it should look familiar to you because it's the side of Jeff Garriman's house where Mr. Garriman's body was ultimately found. And that image was in Mr. Tellis's phone. Detectives also execute a search warrant on the office of Mr. Tellis at the public administrator's office. They search his work computer as well. And in some of the searching on his work computer, they find that he was looking up the make and model associated with Jeff Garriman's car, which I think is a Honda. So that was found in his work computer as well. And all that, all the articles kind of conclude in like late June of 2022. In July,
Tellis does not want to take the stand. He doesn't want to have to explain to the jury why he was taking pictures of Mr. Garriman's house, why he was looking up the make and model of Mr. Garriman's car. He should not be taking the stand. It is not going to go well for him.
Of 2022, Mr. Garriman does a public records request from the county. And the records request is for more documents and communications from the public administrator's office. And specifically, he's asking for emails between Robert Tellis and an individual by the name of Roberta Lee Kennett. He's asking for all communications and messages on Teams, which is a way, inter-office way of communicating. He's asking for text messages from their cell phones, and he notes, probably as all reporters do, that you're required as a county agency to respond to a public records request. That request takes place again in July of 2022. The county notifies Mr. Tellis that, hey, Mr. Garriman is requesting additional information from the office, and they're going to work to fulfill that public records request. Mr. Tellis responds to the county that he would like to see whatever is going to be provided in the public records request and asks about how he may be able to do so. And then several weeks pass, and there's another communication from attorneys for the county about the public records request. And if you look at the date and time on this, this is a notification from the DA civil employees about that request on September the 1st of 2022 at 5:45 p.m. So that's about 15 hours before the murder occurs. He gets a notification about Mr. Garriman's request. On a calendar, there's an email on the 1st at 5:45 p.m. and about 15 hours later, the murder occurs. In the end, this case isn't about politics. It's not about alleged inappropriate relationships. It's not about who's a good boss or who's a good supervisor or favoritism at work. It's just about murder. And at the end of the presentation of the evidence, we'll ask you to hold him responsible for his conduct.
Okay, at this time, we're going to take a recess. During this recess, you're admonished not to discuss or communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, in any
All right, so the court is in recess at this point. So I'm going to open up another live. I'm going to pause this. They'll probably be back. Let's see, it's what time in Nevada right now? It's about 11:44, so they're probably taking a lunch break right now. But before we do that, I want to show you some of the allegations in the complaint that was filed by the women in his office who are alleging that Mr. Tellis created a hostile work environment. Now, you did, during the opening statement of the prosecutor, you did see those images of that woman that worked in Tellis's office exiting a vehicle in a parking garage. That vehicle belonged, I believe, it either belonged to Mr. Tellis or to the woman in the office, and they were exiting the back seat of that vehicle. This is one of his employees. He's maintained that his relationship with her was strictly business, and that he was in the back seat with her just to have a private place to talk with her about some issues. But he would frequently, according to the other women, he would frequently take these breaks from work at the same time that she would. And they don't really get into it in their complaint. But if that case goes to trial, that woman's situation, the situation he had with that woman, is going to be juxtaposed next to how he treated the other women in the office, because they are alleging essentially that she was given preferential treatment because she was responding positively to his advances, while two other women who are claiming that he was sexually discriminating against them were treated negatively because they were not responding positively. We're not going to go through the entire complaint. It's pretty long, but there are some allegations just so you can kind of get an idea of what they're alleging here. So this is the complaint. And it says here, Tellis made numerous inconsistent comments about Reed's age. So one of the women is a 40-plus-year-old career public servant, and Tellis made numerous inconsistent comments about Reed's age, including calling her an old-timer who did not want to get on board with Tellis's new policies and procedures. Over the next 3 years, Tellis specifically instructed PAO employees not to talk to Reed, not to ask her for help, and would demand to know the subject of any conversations that Reed had with other employees. This became so bad that Reed began telling PAO employees who approached her that it was not a good idea to talk to her. So she is alleged age discrimination claim against Mr. Tellis, along with the hostile work environment claim. Then you've got, Tellis would often barge into Reed's office and reprimand and yell at her for trivial issues. It was clear by his actions that Tellis intended to intimidate and humiliate Reed. There's another woman, Coleman. Coleman is alleging sexual harassment as well as, sexual discrimination, as well as the hostile work environment claim. As a result of her job, Coleman worked largely alone in an area known as the vault. The vault contained the possessions of deceased persons, which were being held by the PAO until either next of kin took ownership or the items were sent to auction. Initially, so imagine this area that is totally secluded from everything else because it has to be kept secure, and the belongings of deceased persons have to be kept secure within a subpart of that vault area. Miss Coleman works alone in this vault that usually has no windows or no access except for the single door leading out of this area. Initially, Tellis took advantage of Coleman's isolation by using it to be inappropriately close to her. Tellis would enter the vault when no one else except Coleman was there and would sit so close to her that they were almost touching, or positioned himself in a way that left her trapped until he left. At one point in June of 2022, Tellis entered the vault and began berating Coleman. His face turned red and Tellis continued to yell at Mr. Coleman, getting closer to her as he did it. Eventually, Tellis backed Coleman up against a fence. So inside of this vault is a fenced off area. Inside of that is going to be storage compartments for various deceased persons' personal belongings that have to then come be claimed by their next of kin. Eventually, Tellis backed Coleman up to a fence in a way that kept her from being able to leave and grabbed her arm. Tellis was less than a foot away from Coleman at this point. Ironically, during this period, Tellis would frequently pull PAO employee Roberta Lee Kennett into his office. Now, Roberta Lee Kennett, I believe, is the other person who you saw in the video that was exiting the vehicle in the parking lot. This is the one who is allegedly responding favorably to the advances of Mr. Tellis, the alleged advances. Ironically, during this time period, Tellis would frequently pull PAO employee Roberta Lee Kennett into his office, where they would spend anywhere from 15 minutes to several hours with the door closed. PAO employees, including Reed, could hear the two giggling and talking. In another incident during March of 2020, Tellis entered the vault area when Coleman was alone and proceeded to get extremely close to her. Tellis scolded Coleman for isolating herself and not eating lunch with the other plaintiffs, despite this being made impossible by Tellis's changes to Coleman's schedule, as well as the general policies and procedures of her job. Tellis leaned within inches of Coleman's face and told her that she would die alone, and no one would find her for a long time if she kept this behavior up, just like the cases they received in the office. So those are just a few of the allegations in this complaint. And I'm not going to pass judgment on whether I think that these allegations are true or not, but they do go to show what it was that Mr. Gehrman was investigating, what his articles were about, and why he was so intent on bringing this to light, given that Mr. Tellis is a public official, and there are 4 employees who are making these allegations and or corroborating these allegations. In addition, those are just 4 people who are named in the lawsuit, in addition to other employees who are corroborating the events. So that, according to the prosecution's theory of the case, as you saw, provided the impetus, the motive for Mr. Tellis to allegedly commit the crime that he allegedly committed. So that's pretty much what we've got now. And I will pick back up here later today, more than likely, to cover the second half of day 1 of this trial. And we'll continue to cover the trial throughout the 10 to 15 day period that the court has indicated this trial will last. If any of you have any questions in the meantime that you want me to answer in advance of any of these lives that I'm doing, or immediately following the lives, just drop a comment to any one of the lives. We do respond to comments, so we will get to your questions, comments, or concerns either during the live or in response to the comments themselves. For now, my name is Nathan Saunders, and this is The Legal Good. Thank you so much for coming.